My name is Nicolay. I'm a faculty in the program design tutor at the Strelka Institute for Media Architecture and Design here in Moscow, and I'm very happy to welcome you here and introduce the launch of this special research project entitled Cultures of Congestion. It was co-organized in collaboration with ArtRebels as part of a global initiative exploring a better future for mobility. So I also want to thank them for their contribution to the thinking and the research. So this project and also this live informal conference and conversation with some of the contributors is really the result of an experiment on our part to basically assemble a small group of researchers and thinkers from our international community and alumni network, and to essentially think through this issue of congestion with the participation of internationally renowned experts in various different fields, in order to think through, basically think about congestion rather as a lens rather than as a topic, and really think critically through congestion as opposed to about congestion, in order to explore and reveal what that could mean for our contemporary cities. So you'll see that the project really puts together a range of different issues around congestion to really discover what that might mean for urbanism and how we could design our future cities, but also discover what cities mean in the first place. So before I introduce the general scope of the projects, I wanted to say maybe a few things about the format of this conversation. So you'll see that the conference is really, we want to basically take this opportunity to connect with various different voices from different cities and different time zones. And really the format will be quite informal, less of a choreographed, strict top-down delivery of content, but more a succession of small and shorter interventions. It usually stands in as a synonym for traffic. If you live in Moscow, but I'm sure that across the world, everyone is kind of familiar with this notion, or at least it feels that way. It typically refers to the movement of cars in their city, and it typically is framed as a problem or as a crisis to be resolved, a crisis of lost time, a crisis of lost value, a crisis of inefficiency caused by poor transport planning, poor land use, population growth out of control. And because it is framed usually as a problem, it's implicitly invites a type of thinking around solutions for congestion. Solutions that are based on the addition or on the development or on growth of road infrastructure in the city, and usually resulting in the larger and more sprawling cities in the process, with more and more individual drivers in more and more congested and gridlocked situations. So this particular reading to us was actually quite interesting because as a research institute, as a design research institute at Strelka, we tend to have two approaches around the issues of urbanism. One of them is to bring about unfamiliar topics to the field of urbanism within our folds and kind of try to connect them with urban thinking. And the other approach is really to take things that are deceptively simple and deceptively obvious and try to think about them in unfamiliar ways. So in other words, thinking about familiar topics and unfamiliar ways is really how we think about our research agendas, and congestion was no exception. So for this particular project, we were really interested to think about this concept and how it could be put to work on different terms. As I already mentioned, not thinking about it as the focus of our research, but really the lens of our research. Thinking about the city through the lens of congestion, or rediscovering what congestion might mean in order to rediscover what the city has always been and what it could be. We wanted to essentially move away from congestion as usually connected to our deeply seated assumption, and basically fold that into our modes of practice rather than simply treat it as a problem of cars in the city. So again, moving away from this reading and moving away from thinking through congestion rather than about congestion, we really wanted to basically see how can we find different ways into the design of this. So rethinking about the agency that congestion might afford us. Heterogeneity and vertical dynamism, associated with the modern city and its grid. within our research and within our project, we wanted to reappropriate his iconic coinage, his iconic framing of this term, but really strip it away, deliberately strip it away from any kind of theoretical legacy, and really just take it much more literally at face value. Essentially, not think about it as a new master theory for congestion and for the city, but really as a starting point for a range of ideas and a range of possible courses of action in order to develop new insights and new social habits and new discover what new cultural aspirations could emerge if we critically inspect our cities in this new way. So moving away from Manhattan, we focused our gaze on three particular contexts, three particular cities, very distinct case studies with very distinct properties in terms of how they connect with a theme of congestion, but also different ways of thinking through the topics that we wanted to address in the rediscovery of our cities. So our first case study, which we will expand upon, ended up being Mexico City. Of course, due to its very specific relationship with congestion in terms of its environmental concerns, and due also to its very unique geographic specificity, it allowed us to basically think about the cities as infrastructures that should be much more closely connected to their ecological infrastructures, and also how this reveals the problem of congestion and city building not as a problem of growth necessarily, but more as a problem of management and much more close links between ecological infrastructures and the city. In our second case, much closer to home, we focused on the city of Moscow, where we are based here. And really, our interest here lied in the representation models of the city and cultures around how we create visions of the city through simulation, through mathematical abstractions that obviously are often linked to narratives of efficiency and control, but also are linked to a certain cultural performativity. In the case of Moscow, this is a city that is probably known for its famous traffic jams, but it also has one of the most efficient metro systems. And here we linked this connection between the personal, performativity of freedom and autonomy with another type of performativity around our expectations of computational models and systems and what narratives they tell us, and obviously what other types of narratives they should be telling us. And finally, our third case study was the city of Melbourne, which is not a usual suspect, not a usual city that one might think in terms of congestion, but one which actually really introduced the topic of institutional design and what is the role of institutions within the city to leverage congestion as a tool, as a strategic leverage point for shifts in how we think about placemaking and how roads and places are actually one of the same, or maybe two sides of the same coin, as will become clear. So this was actually a very brief overview around many more questions that we investigated in this project for the past few weeks. And I would actually invite you to take a look at. I know that some of you may be already watching this conference from the platform. But you will find many more resources and all of our kind of investigations on the platform here.